So as I shared, the flower communion was created 100 years ago this June. And it was created by a gentleman with a very interesting name. His name is Norbert Chopik. He's named Norbert because he was born on a saint's day in Czechoslovakia. Does anybody know who Saint Norbert is? Well, Norbert got stuck with the name, and I didn't know who Saint Norbert was, and I really don't have a great idea, except for he was made a saint over 500 years ago. And ironically, there is a Saint Norbert Catholic Church right here in Orange County, California. So Norbert Chopik was born in 1870 in Czechoslovakia. And at the time he was born into a Catholic family. They were extremely adherent Catholics, and he started to have some questions. So Norbert, from the very beginning, had questions. So you guys already know he was destined to become a Unitarian Universalist. And Norbert's family sent him off to get the best education possible he could get with his uncle. And while he was living with his uncle, who was a tailor, he started slipping off from the Catholic ceremonies, which he didn't really enjoy because they were in Latin. And he said, there's this Baptist church. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we just had a guest walk in, and she's moved here from all the way across the country in Florida back to California. So welcome, 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 Deirdre. She's like, and you're late. No, but that's what happens when you're late. But welcome, happy Easter. So Norbert's uncle was a tailor, and Norbert found the Baptists in Czechoslovakia, and he really liked the Baptists primarily because they did their services in his language and not in Latin. But his uncle had nothing to do with that, and his uncle fired him, kicked him out of the house, and left him on his own. But Norbert had impressed the Baptists. They basically adopted him. They sent him to seminary. He became Reverend Norbert, and he started 6 Baptist churches in Czechoslovakia. He had 8 kids too. He was a busy dude. Then Norbert moved to America. Him, his wife, his 8 kids. Something happened, I'm not sure, but his wife passed away, and he was able to find some lady who said yes and took on those 8 kids. And her name is Maja. Is it Maja or Maya? Maya. That J is really tricky, even when it's in Czechoslovakian. And so there's a slide that'll show you what these wonderful people look like. So with his second wife, he moved back to Czechoslovakia after having come to America, again going to seminary, this time to the seminary. What's the name of the seminary in Chicago for the Unitarian Universalist? That one. So Norbert went to that seminary and became a Unitarian Universalist minister. And he moved back to Czechoslovakia to spread the Unitarian Universalist message. And he opened a very basic, very simple church. And because many of the people that were coming to his church, this was right after World War I, many of the people that came to his church were dissatisfied and disenfranchised with their previous religious experiences. So the church had no music, it had no symbols, it had no rituals. But it also, after a couple of years, seemed to be very much like just an academic setting. And this is where the flower communion came from. So he looked around, and it was springtime in Prague, and he invited everyone to bring flowers like we did today. And everyone in the congregation brought in their flowers, and they mixed their flowers. The way that they did it is they set up a big vase or vase, tomato, and everyone would bring their flowers and they allowed the children, because they were also, this is an interesting point, they were the largest Unitarian church in the world. They had thousands of members, because in Czechoslovakia, the Catholic Church didn't fare so well with their public relations after World War I. And so he started the flower communion as a way of developing ritual and ceremony for this new church that he was responsible for starting. And so earlier, I mentioned that this particular time of year is an extremely important time of year in the three largest religions around the world, right? In the Jewish faith tradition, they just had Passover, and I'm blessed and lucky enough that when I was in law school, I had a mentor that invited me to a Seder and allowed me to experience and understand and see some of the ritual and tradition and the storytelling that was involved in a Seder and Passover, and the symbology of the bitter herb and the other things that are on the table. And that's what Norbert Koppig was looking to develop for Unitarians, because we're one of the younger faith traditions, if you will. We're not over 2,000 years old, like Christianity, not over 1,000 years old, like Islam. And the Jewish faith tradition is even older. But in that, what I want to share with you is this is what came out of it. And it was important to have an offering that could show the individual elements of the community and how we may grow differently. We may be a flowering plant. I think everything here is flowering today. We may be yellow, we may be pink, different shapes and different sizes. And it's very easy for you to see that if every flower here was exactly the same and had the exact same shape, size, and color, the altar that we have created would not be as robust or as beautiful. And each of us represents one of these flowers. We're all different colors, different shapes. We all grow differently. We all require different things to make us go. So the symbology of it all is very important. And so the flower communion was brought to the United States in 1940, and it was introduced in Massachusetts. Now, a very interesting part about Norbert's journey is his wife came on a trip to America, and this was actually around the beginnings of World War II. And so if you can imagine a faith in Czechoslovakia with thousands of members that preached hope, unity, and togetherness, that was not a favorite of the Nazi regime that was coming in World War II. So as we practice this flower communion, there was this hope that Maya had when she came to America, and it was the hope of spreading this new ceremony to America. And that ceremony was spread, and she was unable to return home because of the war. And it wasn't until after the war that America found out what happened to Norbert. You see, as I said, the Nazis weren't a fan of that message of hope and unity and choice. And so he was arrested on a charge of listening to a foreign news broadcast. And he was in his 70s at this time. And he was placed in a concentration camp. And because he was one of the older people in the concentration camp, for 4 months, he endured experiments, and then he was placed in the gas chamber. And so Norbert was transformational and is credited with starting the Unitarian Universalist faith in Czechoslovakia, which doesn't even exist anymore. But out of his whole journey and in the hope of his journey, 100 years later, all of you know a very strange name today named Norbert. And in that hope, we have gathered like the children and the ladies and gentlemen in Czechoslovakia 100 years ago an altar of many different flowers. And then one of the reasons it's hypothesized that he was killed while he was in the concentration camp is because his spirit did not falter, it is reported, once he was in the concentration camp. He was the local cheerleader, if you will. He would sing songs and tell jokes. There were no flowers in the concentration camp, but he still had a flower communion, and they did it with rocks and twigs. And so I was thinking about that this morning, and the very first time that I saw Paul Schmidt was in Heisler Park across the street, many years before I ever came into this fellowship. Just as a side note, I passed this place for 15 years before I ever came inside. My best friend lived up the street, and it's a one-way street, so I had to pass it every day when I would come to see him. And then one day, 5-6 years ago, I followed somebody in, and here we are. But the first time I saw Paul was over in Heisler Park. So I learned this fact about what Norbert had done when he was in the concentration camp. So I went over to Heisler Park and I walked around and I said, I'm going to find a rock like Norbert did when they were in the concentration camp. And I'm going to place this rock onto our table for all of the members of our community that aren't here today, and in honor of Norbert. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer a short prayer that's going to consecrate these flowers. And I'm going to invite you all, while Carol plays a short interlude, to come up and take a different flower than the one that you brought. Even if you didn't bring one, I invite you to come and take one. And the whole symbology and purpose is, one, you're going to go away with something different than you came with, which is what hopefully happens when you come into community here with us. We grow together, we learn together. And so whenever Dr. Chopik conducted his flower communion in Prague, he would consecrate the flowers and say these words. Infinite Spirit of life, we ask thy blessing on these, thy messengers of fellowship and love. May they remind us, amid diversities of knowledge and of gifts, to be one in desire and affection and devotion to thy holy will. May they also remind us of the value of comradeship, of doing and sharing alike. May we cherish friendship as one of thy most precious gifts. May we not let awareness of another's talents discourage us or sully our relationship, but may we realize that whatever we can do, great or small, the efforts of all of us are needed to do thy work in this world. And with that, I say, Ashe, Allah, Amen, Namaste, and blessed be. And Carol, please play us a few selections while each comes and takes one of these consecrated flowers and remembers that we're all unique, but we're all necessary to make the bouquet and the tapestry. So we have consecrated. So we all have a blossom. And here is what I hope. I hope that each of you remember that none of us is anywhere on their own, and that we're all unique, and that it takes all of the different flowers to make the beautiful bouquet that we get. And I am now